Hey look, new background. This is actually a real one, not a green screen. So today I'm going to tell you a story where you recognize the victim, but you don't recognize the killer. Because the victim is actually very famous for something, and you will find out when you stick around to the very end. So here goes. For Christopher, he dropped out of high school when he was in the 11th grade because he just wasn't doing so well in school. And his mother, not only did she not support him, his mother actually kicked him out of the house because Christopher was actually addicted to alcohol and marijuana. Now that he has no place to live and he has no income, he had to find a job. And miraculously, for a little bit, he found a job as a carpenter trainee at a Wisconsin Conservation Corps program. At the program, his then supervisor, Edward Patz, promised him that once he finishes that program, he would be granted a full-time position. And now hearing that good news, he got so excited and he actually went to work every day and worked really hard. And he just couldn't wait for the day where he could actually start his full-time position, because then he would have stable income, he would be able to afford things to eat, and he would be able to afford a place to stay. But before that could ever happen, his supervisor, Edward Patz, was unfortunately dismissed from his job. So now, not only does Christopher not have his supervisor anymore, he now lost the opportunity to get the full-time job that Edward Patz had promised him. And with all this frustration and anger, he began to drink very, very heavily, even more so than before. And as his constant consumption of alcohol began to, in turn, consume his life, he started hearing voices. So these voices began to intrude and overpopulate his mind. And these voices are all telling him the same things over and over again. And that is that he was the chosen one. Simply put, Christopher was suffering from Messiah complex, and he was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. And with an addiction as financially crippling as alcoholism, a person would only have a few paths to choose from. One would be to find an actual job with steady income so that this could pay for your addiction. The second would be to ask your relatives, your friends for money. But how long can you keep that up, right? How long can you keep borrowing money? Third is to gamble and hope for the best. Hopefully you win something. Hopefully you win it big so that you could pay for your addiction. But then there's this fourth option, which unfortunately a lot of people turn to, and that is crime. And that was what Christopher actually turned to. So one day on June 1st, 1990, Christopher decided to pay that job program a visit. He wasn't there to say hello, or he wasn't there to say how are you and trying to catch up with anybody there. He was there for money. So when he got there, he was greeted by two people. One was the site manager. His name was John Fayen. And there was another employee. His name was Steve Lohman. And once Christopher got there, he pulled his gun out and forced both of them onto the ground. And once they're both on the ground, he pointed a gun directly onto Steve's head, and he looked over at John and demanded money. He said, "I need money." So in a state of panic, John pulled out his wallet, looked into his wallet, pulled out as much cash as he could, and he handed it over to Christopher. And when Christopher received those bills, he looked at it, counted it, and immediately he was very insulted because there was only $15 in there. And now that he was even more angry, he actually used a gun and shot Steve right in the head, killing him instantly. And as Steve fell to the floor, Christopher looked at John and said, "All right, did you think I was kidding? I need more money." And right after he said that, he fired two more shots into Steve's dead body. Now, John is in a state of panic. He actually found a check where he actually wrote $3,000 on the check, which is roughly $6,300 today. And he handed that check to Christopher. And when Christopher received the check and started reading it, John actually made a run to his car. And as he was fleeing, Christopher actually tried to shoot him, but fortunately, he missed. After this ordeal, Christopher was actually caught. He didn't even put up a fight. He actually was just sitting at his doorstep when the police arrested him. And ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison in 1992. You would think this is the end of the story, but it's not over yet. Because 2 years later, while Christopher Scarver was living out his life sentence in prison, he was assigned to do janitorial work with 2 other inmates. And as soon as Christopher found out who these inmates were, his Messiah complex kicked in again, and he knew exactly what he needed to do. So this janitorial work was for all 3 of them to actually clean the prison gymnasium bathroom, and for some reason, for a brief moment, all 3 of them were left unattended. And when that time window opened, Christopher saw the opportunity to do what he needed to do. He went to the exercise room and took out a metal bar. So this was probably something that he dismantled from one of the weightlifting equipment. So I would think it is either a barbell or a bar from a dumbbell. So he took this bar and he cornered one of the inmates in the locker room. Once that inmate was just cornered, Christopher pulled out a newspaper clipping and put it in front of that inmate's face. And he asked him, "Did you really do this?" And before that inmate could even answer, Christopher took the metal bar and bashed the inmate on the head. And that wasn't enough. He took that inmate's head and repeatedly slammed it against the wall until that inmate was unresponsive. But he wasn't done. What happened to the other inmates? Christopher went over to the other inmate and quickly did the same thing to him, but he didn't use the metal bar. He actually just used a wooden stick. When this whole event was over, prison guard actually showed up and found inmate 1 and inmate 2 unresponsive on the floor and clinging on to dear life. And so they had to rush them to the hospital, where those 2 inmates had to undergo emergency surgery. But the injuries proved to be too much for one of the inmates. One of the inmates was a 34-year-old cannibalistic serial killer, because within 1 hour of arrival, the ER was the place where Jeffrey Dahmer drew his final breaths. And as for the other inmate, his name was Jesse Anderson. He died 2 days later because he was removed from life support. And it would turn out that the reason why Christopher Scarver had to do what he did to Jeffrey Dahmer and Jesse Anderson was because of the crimes that they did. The crimes that they did, Christopher Scarver felt that they were injustice towards African Americans. Jesse Anderson killed his wife and tried to blame 2 African American males for it. And as for Jeffrey Dahmer, I'm sure everyone knew that most of his victims were from African American descent. And that's it. That's the short story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe.